John Murray's History of the Jews. Book 1. The Patriarchal Age. Prefatory Remarks. Life of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Progress of Civilization. Observations on the Patriarchal History. The Jews, without reference to their religious belief, are among the most remarkable people in the annals of mankind. Sprung from one stock, they passed the infancy of their nation in a state of servitude in a foreign country, where, nevertheless, they increase so rapidly as to appear on a sudden the fierce and irresistible conquerors of their native valleys and Palestine. There they settled down under a form of government and code of laws totally unlike those of any other rude or civilized community. They sustain a long and doubtful conflict, sometimes enslaved, sometimes victorious, with the neighboring tribes. At length, united under one monarchy, they gradually rise to the rank of a powerful, opulent, and commercial people. Subsequently, weakened by internal discord, they are overwhelmed by the vast monarchies which arose on the banks of the Euphrates and transplanted into a foreign region. They are partially restored by the generosity or policy of the Eastern sovereigns to their native land. They are engaged in wars of the most romantic gallantry in assertion of their independence against the Syro-Grecian successors of Alexander. Under Herod, they rise to a second era of splendor as a dependent kingdom of Rome. Finally, they make the last desperate resistance to the universal dominion of the Caesars. Scattered from that period over the face of the earth, hated, scorned, and oppressed, they subsist, a numerous and often a thriving people, and in all the changes of manners and opinions retain their ancient institutions, their national character, and their indelible hope of restoration to grandeur and happiness in their native land. Thus the history of this, perhaps the only unmingled race which can boast of high antiquity, leads us through every gradation of society and brings us into contact with almost every nation which commands our interest in the ancient world. The migratory pastoral population of Asia, Egypt, the mysterious parent of arts, science, and legislation, the Arabian desert, the Hebrew theocracy under the form of a federative agricultural republic, their kingdom powerful in war and splendid in peace, Babylon in its magnificence and downfall, Grecian arts and luxury endeavoring to force an unnatural refinement within the pale of the rigid Mosaic institutions, Roman arms waging an exterminating war with the independence even of the smallest states. It descends at length to all the changes in the social state of the modern European and Asiatic nations. The religious history of this people is no less singular. In the narrow slip of land inhabited by their tribes, the worship of one almighty creator of the universe subsists, as in its only sanctuary. In every stage of society, under the pastoral tent of Abraham, and in the sumptuous temple of Solomon, the same creed maintains its inviolable simplicity. During their long intercourse with foreign nations in Egypt and Babylon, though the primitive habits and character of the Hebrew nation were greatly modified, and perhaps some theological notions engrafted on their original tenets, this primary distinction still remains. After several periods of almost total apostasy, it revives in all its vigor. Nor is this merely a sublime speculative tenet. It is the basis of their civil constitution and of their national character. As there is but one Almighty God, so there is but one people under his especial protection, the descendants of Abraham. Hence, their civil and religious history are inseparable. The God of the chosen people is their temporal as well as spiritual sovereign. He is not merely their legislator, but also the administrator of their laws. Their land is his gift, held from him as from a feudal liege lord on certain conditions. He is their leader in war, their counselor in peace. Their happiness or adversity, national as well as individual, depends solely and immediately on their maintenance or neglect of the divine institutions. Such was the common popular religion of the Jews, as it appears in all their records, in their law, their history, their poetry, and their moral philosophy. Hence, to the mere speculative inquirer, the study of the human race presents no phenomenon so singular as the character of this extraordinary people. To the Christian, no chapter in the history of mankind can be more instructive or important than that which contains the rise, progress, and downfall of his religious ancestors. Abraham, the father of the faithful, holds an eminent place in all Oriental tradition, not only among the Jews, but likewise among the Persians, Arabians, and perhaps the Indians. It is difficult to say how far these legends may have been propagated by the Mahometan conquests, for our knowledge of the history and literature of Eastern nations anterior to the Hegira is still limited and unsatisfactory. The Arabian accounts of Abraham adopted into the Quran are no doubt much older than Muhammad, but whether they were primitive traditions or embellishments of their authentic history, originating among the Jews themselves, is a question perhaps impossible to decide. The simplicity of the narrative in the book of Genesis affords a remarkable contrast to the lofty pretensions which the patriarch assumes in these legends, as the teacher not merely of religious truth, but of science, arithmetic, mathematics, and astronomy, to the Egyptians. Abram was the son of Terah, the head of a pastoral family, consisting of 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran, probably the eldest, died early, leaving a son named Lot. Abram was married to Sarah, daughter of Terah, by another wife. Nahor married Milcah, a daughter of Haran. Their native place was Ur, a district to the northeast of that region, which lies above the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates, and became afterwards the seat of the great Babylonian monarchy. About Ur the country is open, dry, and barren, well suited for pasture, but not for tillage. In the spacious and level plains of Chaldea, where the nights are delightfully cool and serene, a pastoral people would naturally be led to contemplate the heavenly bodies with peculiar attention. To this country the first rudiments of astronomy are generally ascribed, and here the earliest form of idolatry, the worship of the host of heaven, usually called Sabaism, began to spread. The Arabian traditions suppose that a farther step had been already taken, and represent Terah, the father of Abram, as a maker of images, called from his name Teraphim. Other legends attribute to this period the origin of fire worship. But whatever the system or systems of religion, in whatever manner he acquired his purer notions of the deity, Abram stood alone in a tribe and family of idolaters as the worshipper of the one great Creator. According to the usage of nomadic tribes, the family of Terah broke up from their settlement at Ur and migrated to Karhan, a flat, barren region lying west of Ur, and celebrated in later history for the defeat of Marcus Crassus near Carrhae. After a residence of some years in Karhan, the pastoral horde divided, and Abram set forth to establish an independent tribe in a remote region. Lot, the son of his brother Haran, followed his fortunes. Nahor remained with Terah, his father, the hereditary chieftain of the settlement in Karhan. This separation of Abraham as the single stock from which a new tribe was to trace its unmingled descent is ascribed to the express command of God. Already, while in Ur, Abram had received some communication from the deity. To his departure into Canaan, he was incited by a direct promise, the most splendid which could be offered to the ambition of the head of a nomadic tribe, in which numbers constitute power and wealth. His seed was to become hereafter a great nation. A more obscure and mysterious intimation was added, that some part of his future race should exercise a most important influence on the destinies of mankind. The family of Abram, already grown into a petty clan, moved with all their flocks and slaves across the Euphrates, according to a tradition preserved by Justin and by an ancient author quoted in Josephus, dwelt some time near Damascus, and arriving at length in Palestine, settled first at Shechem, a valley between the mountains Abal and Gerizim, then in a hilly region to the north of Jericho, afterwards called the desert of Corintania. As the pastors were exhausted, the tribe moved southward, till a famine again drove them forth, and Egypt, probably the earliest, certainly the most productive, corn country of the ancient world, became, as at a later period, the only place of refuge, except as showing that the valley of the Nile was already occupied by an industrious agricultural population. The visit of Abram throws little light on the existing state of Egypt. The monarch seems to have lived in considerable state, and possessed a numerous seraglio, which was supplied by any means, however lawless or violent. This was so notorious that Abram, through an independent sheikh or emir, if his fair-complexioned Mesopotamian wife should excite the cupidity of the swarthy Egyptians, might apprehend the worst consequences. He ran the risk not only of losing his wife, but of being murdered for the sake of so valuable a prize. He took the precaution, therefore, to make Sarai assume the name of his sister. She was in fact his father's daughter, though not by the same mother, perhaps hoping that, if sought in legitimate marriage, he might protract the espousals till the famine would permit him to make his escape from the country. The event justified his apprehensions. Sarai was seized and transferred to the harem of the sovereign, who was so proud of his acquisition as to make magnificent presents to Abram, intended, it may seem, as a dowry for his sister. In a short time, a pestilence broke out in the royal family. The king, having discovered the relationship between Abram and Sarai, attributed the visitation to the god of the stranger, who thus revenged his breach of hospitality. Abram received back his wife and returned to Canaan, loaded with possessions suited to his habits of life, sheep and oxen, and he-asses, and men-servants, and maid-servants, and she-asses, and camels, a curious picture of the wealth of a pastoral chieftain. In Canaan, Abram is described as not merely rich in these simpler commodities, but in silver and gold, obtained probably in exchange for the produce of his flocks and herds from the settled native population of the towns. Abram first reoccupied his former encampment near the site where Bethel subsequently stood, and offered sacrifice for his safe return from Egypt on an altar which he had before built on one of the adjacent heights. There, the pastures proving insufficient for the great stock of cattle which the tribe possessed, disputes arose between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot. The chieftains, dreading lest the native clans should take advantage of their divisions and expel or plunder both, agreed to part amicably, and thenceforth inhabit independent settlements. Lot departed eastward into the rich and blooming valley of the Jordan, then abounding in flourishing towns. This separation still farther secured the unmingled descent of the Abrahamic Abrahamic family, and the Almighty renewed the promise of a race, countless as the dust of the earth, the future possessors of Palestine, which Abram was commanded to survey from its northern to its southern, its eastern to its western extremities, as the inalienable patrimony of his descendants. In pursuance of this command, Abram again moved his encampment, and the tents of his tribe were pitched in the southern plain of Mamre. But the more fertile district, which had attracted the choice of Lot, exposed him to perpetual dangers. The rich valley of the Jordan was invaded by a confederacy of the kingdoms on the Euphrates and Tigris, headed by Kedor Laomer, king of Elam, Elamites. His subordinate allies were Amraphel, king of Shinar, the Babylonian plain, Arioch, king of Elasar, perhaps Telasar, and Tidal, king of nations. Whether a considerable monarchy had already grown up on the banks of the Tigris, or whether this was a league of several small predatory tribes, does not appear from the Hebrew annalist. The independent princes in the valley of the Jordan, the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, submitted to pay tribute. 13 years after, they endeavored to throw off the yoke, but Kedor Laomer advanced into the country, subdued all the neighboring tribes, some of whom were of gigantic stature, and at last joined battle with the princes of the Jordan in the vale of Siddim. There the ground was broken with deep pits and fissures caused by the bituminous nature of the soil. The troops of the 5 confederates were routed. 2 of the kings fell among the pits. The rest of the army dispersed, and Lot, among others, was seized as a captive. A fugitive brought the intelligence to Abram, who hastily collected 318 of his own clan, called some of the neighboring tribes to his assistance, and pursued the enemy to a place near the fountains of the Jordan. He fell on their camp by night, dispersed them, rescued Lot with the rest of the prisoners, and recovered the booty. This defeat, by so small a force, is thought to give but a mean notion of the strength of the invading army. Yet among undisciplined troops of different nations, the panic from an unexpected night attack is often so great that the inference can scarcely be considered decisive. This bold exploit ensured the admiration and gratitude of all the native chieftains. The king of Salem, by some thought to be Jerusalem, by others a town near Scytopolis, where a ruin called Melchizedek's Palace was shown in the time of Jerome, met him at a place called the King's Vale, sometimes identified with the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Melchizedek, the King of Justice, such was his honorable title, united in his own person, like the monarchs of the heroic ages in Greece and Rome, and indeed of most among the early Oriental tribes, the office of king and priest. Like Abram, he worshipped the one great God, in whose name he blessed the deliverer of his country from foreign invaders, and refreshed his troops with bread and wine. On his part, Abram, according to general custom, consecrated a 10th part of the spoil to their common deity by Melchizedek, whose priesthood he thus recognized. As he rivaled Melchizedek in piety, so Abram equaled the king of Sodom in generosity. He refused to retain any part of the spoil, not so much as a shoe latchet. He only reserved a portion for the young native sheikhs, Aner, Eshael, and Mamre, who had joined him in his expedition. But the pious conqueror returned to a childless tent and a barren wife. The name, the chieftainship of his clan, would pass away into the line of a stranger, Eliezer of Damascus, who held the next rank in the tribe. Yet the divine promise was repeatedly renewed, and under the most striking circumstances. One night, as Abram gazed on the cloudless heavens, the celestial voice commanded him to count the stars of the firmament, for even so numerous should be his descendants. The aged and childless man yielded up his soul to perfect reliance on his almighty benefactor. The promise was further ratified by a covenant, transacted in the primitive form of federal compact, which subsisted among various nations to a late period. A sacrifice was offered, the victims exactly divided, and the contracting parties passed between the two halves, which lay opposite to each other. Abram offered an heifer of 3 years old, a she-goat of 3 years old, a ram of 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. These he divided, except the birds, and sat watching till the evening, lest the fowls of prey should stoop upon them. As the sun declined, a deep sleep fell upon him, and more than common darkness spread around. A voice announced the fate of his posterity, their servitude of 4 centuries in a foreign land, their return, their possession of the whole territory from the Euphrates to the sea. As the sun set, the symbol of the deity, a cloud of smoke like that of a furnace, a flashing fire like that of a lamp, passed between the severed victims, and thus solemnly ratified the covenant. Still, the tent of Abram resounded not with the welcome cry of infancy. At length Sarai, despairing of issue from her own body, had recourse to a custom still known in the East, particularly in China. The chief or lawful wife substitutes a slave in her own place. The children born in this manner have the rank and privilege of legitimacy, and are considered in every respect as the offspring of the mistress of the establishment. In this manner, Hagar, an Egyptian slave, bore a son to Abraham. He was named Ishmael. I will pick up next time.